My colleagues manage with this, so stop complaining when you haven't contributed to the ascent. That's what James exclaimed as he threw $300 at me for our monthly expenses. The kind husband I thought I had was nowhere to be found. Holding on to that money, I smiled brightly and replied, I contribute $2,000 to our home every month. Seeing the shocked look on James's face, I stood up to meet his gaze. Do you even know our monthly rent? What are you talking about? It's probably around $100, right? Even if we lived in rural Nebraska, can you really expect to rent a 3-bedroom apartment with soundproofing for just $100? Holding back my urge to yell, I quietly placed the divorce lawyer's business card on the desk. Whoa, what's gotten into you? Calm down. James tried to soothe me, his lips quivering. But I calmly responded, it's not sudden, it's all according to plan. I stared at James with cold eyes, his shock rendering him speechless. My revenge had only just begun. My name is Emily Parker. I'm a 35-year-old housewife and a piano teacher. Before getting married, I worked at a music school, but after marriage, I started offering private lessons at home. Juggling household chores, childcare, and teaching piano, my days are pretty packed. I married James when I was 28. We met at a charity concert organized by the piano school where I worked. James helped coordinate equipment and acted as a liaison between us and the venue. He wasn't exactly adept at his job, but he was quick to bond with the venue staff, ensuring smooth negotiations. James asked for my contact information on our way home from the after-party of the competition. I accepted James's invitation for a date, and we began to go out together. Before I knew it, our relationship blossomed, and we got married on our 3rd anniversary. James and I have 2 children. One is a boy who looks just like James, and the other is a girl who looks just like me. People often say that boys resemble their mothers and girls their fathers, but in our case, it was the exact opposite. We used to joke about that. We were a very close-knit family, always going shopping together. However, once our children started elementary school, James began acting strange. I'll be home late again. You've been busy lately, haven't you? My husband, who only occasionally worked overtime at the beginning or end of the month, suddenly had many late nights. He would always come home late, reeking of alcohol. He mentioned that since he switched to a sales job, he had a lot of client dinners. I thought, gee, working in a company must be tough. Thankfully, since I didn't accept students for evening piano lessons, our children were never left alone at night. Because of this, I felt a strong responsibility to support James to the best of my ability. However, he gradually began to show a colder attitude towards me. At first, it was small complaints about meals or housekeeping, but soon he started nitpicking about how I spent money. Hey, what's for dinner today? It's unfair that the meal for the breadwinner, which is me, is the same as for you and the kids. Mine should be more extravagant. Well, I work too, you know, and the kids are growing. They need proper meals. Stop being so selfish. Only young women can get away with that. Stop making excuses and listen to me. Forget it. I'm gonna eat out. With that, James left, leaving me and the kids in shock. I felt anger rising, but seeing my children frightened by James's outburst, I decided it was more important to comfort them. I chose not to worry about where James went. But from that day on, James's behavior changed drastically. Apart from weekday overtime, he also started working more weekends. Despite complaining, I saw a delighted James getting ready, and I couldn't help but feel this isn't about work. Women's intuition, as they say. Observing James closely, I started noticing red flags. He never had an interest in fashion before, but suddenly he began buying brands that younger people would like. He also started spending late nights on the phone out on our balcony, and I noticed a transaction for women's jewelry on our credit card statement. The final straw came when James began dictating how our household expenses should be managed. All these years, you've been overspending, which limited what I could do. From now on, our monthly budget is $300. Got it? $300. That's impossible. Just the groceries for the four of us cost over $500. That's because you're being extravagant. From now on, I'll spend as I please. If you want to spend money, earn more yourself. True to his word, James only gave me $300 from the next month. I managed with my earnings and some savings, but it wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle James expected. For the first time, I seriously considered divorce. Whether there was another woman or not, I used to think it was okay if he came back to us before the kids grew up. But when I thought about whether my children needed a father who acted irresponsibly and didn't care for his family, I felt that maybe we didn't need James. I was still hesitant, but then something happened that made my decision clear. It was a Sunday morning, and I was making breakfast. James, who usually leaves early, was still home. The kids went into his bedroom, hoping to play with him. Then, with a loud voice that could probably be heard outside, James yelled at them, "Would you shut up? Hey, why'd you yell out of nowhere like that? Isn't taking care of the kids your job? Stop slacking off." He snapped at me. "You're their father too, you know," I replied. "Ha, I don't need noisy kids around. I'm trying to get some rest here." "Keep 'em quiet," he retorted. I held back from saying out loud what I was really thinking. "The reason you're tired is probably because you've been staying out late every night, maybe cheating on me." The kids were clearly frightened, hiding behind me. Seeing them like that solidified the idea of divorce in my mind. I needed to protect my kids. As I looked at James, now snoring loudly in bed, I made up my mind. Later, I started by checking my own finances. Could I maintain our lifestyle while continuing my classes from home? And what about the kids' future? To my surprise, I realized I could sustain our lifestyle on my income alone. The reason our expenses had shot up was because of the family credit card we both used. James seemed to forget it was a family card and had been using it liberally. Sometimes, the bills even exceeded $1,000 a month. I had only been checking the total amounts, but James's charges started increasing right around when he began working late. They were all at fancy restaurants and hotels, the kind you go to for a romantic getaway. As I realized he might be using our family card for trysts with his affair, my love for James cooled to absolute zero. Confronting him now might just make him hide the affair, so I decided to make sure our finances were rock solid and then corner him once everything was set. About 3 months after learning about James's affair, I managed to gather all the evidence. James had no idea I was onto him, so gathering evidence was a breeze. No need for a private investigator. Then, on James's payday, I decided it was time to make my move. James was in high spirits that morning, maybe getting ready for a date with his mistress. He was humming while picking out his clothes. I approached him cautiously and said, "Hey, isn't it payday today? The $300 you've been giving for household expenses isn't cutting it. I think you'd understand if you checked our finances." "Will you stop with the excuses? It's all your incompetence. You've ruined my mood," he snapped angrily. I persisted, "But it's not enough. At this rate, we might have to sell the house." James sighed dramatically and ran his fingers through his hair. He took out his wallet, pulled out 3 bills, and waved them at me. "My colleagues get by with this. You haven't contributed a cent, so stop complaining," he said, throwing the $300 meant for our expenses at me. The kind and loving husband I had married was nowhere to be found. I clenched the money and smiled back at him. "I put $2,000 into our home every month," I stated. James looked at me with a blank expression. Standing up, I met his gaze and asked, "Do you even know how much the rent for this house is?" "What are you talking about?" It's probably around 100, right? Regardless of where we live, can you really believe we can live in a 3-bedroom house with a mortgage for just $100? I retorted, holding back my urge to yell. I quietly placed the divorce lawyer's business card on the desk. Michelle, what's going on? Calm down, James said, trying to soothe me with a twisted smile. It's not sudden, it's all according to plan, I replied coldly. James looked shocked, at a loss for words. I stared back with indifferent eyes. The revenge had only just begun. To make things clearer, I placed another set of documents on the table. Seeing them, James's face turned pale. What does this mean? He asked, flustered. These are my income statements and our household expenses, I explained, showing him our household ledger, the house contract, and a copy of the account book we report to the IRS. The ledger detailed our monthly expenses, and the house contract showed the monthly mortgage repayment. You're lying about the $1,000 rent, he accused. No matter how rural Nebraska is, it's a custom-built house with a soundproof room. There's no way we could live here for just $100 a month, I countered. The house we live in was custom-built when we had our child, with both our parents contributing to the down payment. It was my dream house, made possible by my job and our family's support. But even with our parents paying half the price up front, our monthly payments were higher than the neighboring rental properties. We did discuss the price with James at the time, but he brushed it off, saying, I'll leave it to you, Michelle. I used to think he trusted me, but now I see he just found the topic tedious. Why didn't you consult me properly? Isn't that a waste too? James argued. Oh, I did. You just didn't engage. Besides, half of the rent came from my piano lesson earnings, and ever since you only contributed $300 for living expenses, I've been covering everything else. You have no right to complain, I shot back. James was speechless but didn't look convinced. He glared at me then, as if recalling something, smirked. Fine, my bad about the rent, but you should have shown me these papers earlier. I would have thought about it then, he said. Who was the one barely home to discuss these matters? I retorted. All right then. Just add the rent to the $300 living expenses. If you have an income too, why should I bear all the expenses? He seemed to be on the defensive now, looking closely at the household ledger. He began marking it with a red pen. This, and this, all unnecessary expenses. We don't need these lessons. Look, it can be managed with $300. You just spend too much. So he has money for his mistress, but not for our children. I was boiling inside, but it was too early to bring that up. I glanced at the clock and then gave James a sweet smile. Do you know the average monthly grocery bill for a family of 4? Around $120, ain't it? That's why $300 is more than enough. On average, it's $870. What? That's right. The average for a family of 4 is close to $900. Our grocery bills are usually around $600. That's after cutting corners wherever possible. James was lost in thought. Why didn't he realize that living on $300 a month was impossible? I began to feel a headache coming on. So, you can't live on $300. Do you get that? No way. What? It's a lie. James started acting like a child, vehemently denying the truth. I looked at him in disbelief. What I once found endearing about his childlike qualities now seemed creepy, especially for a man in his 40s. My colleague said he can live on $300 a month. You must have altered the numbers, he insisted. Exasperated, I replied, well, maybe Lisa, a 22-year-old newbie still living with her parents, can manage with that amount. The mention of her name caught James off guard, and his confidence vanished. Cold sweat started forming as he stood there. I laid out a few pictures and credit card statements on the table. Lisa Johnson, 22, lives with her working dad and stay-at-home mom. After the party for the new employees, one thing led to another with you. I know about your affair that started after you played the gentleman and sent her home. How do you know all this? James asked, shocked. Because she told me herself. What? It's rare for a wife to hear details of an affair straight from the other woman, I said calmly. Oh, I became friends with her on social media. It was easy. I just approached her, saying I too was having an affair. She quickly spilled the beans and even shared photos. But how? James stammered. In the age of information, you've got to be careful. She shared photos like this one. I placed a picture of them in a compromising position in front of him. James, eyes darting around, was sweating profusely. Oh, and she should be receiving one of these soon. Receiving what? He'd asked, clearly nervous. This legal notice, I said, handing him a certified letter. It was an official document my lawyer had prepared while I gathered evidence. As James read through it, his face turned pale. $5,000. I can't afford that. Your father said that amount was reasonable, didn't he? What? You told my parents? Of course. They should be here any moment, I said just as the doorbell rang. I simply replied, come in, to the person on the intercom and return to the living room. Michelle, is everything sorted? Yes, thank you. Right on time, I responded. My mother-in-law stood behind her husband, looking utterly devastated. My father-in-law, usually a calm man, was red with rage. He approached James and landed a solid punch. Ouch! What was that for, Dad? James exclaimed. You're no son of mine, betraying Michelle like that. You're the worst. I'm gonna knock some sense into that rotten character of yours. James was in shock, and frankly, seeing my father-in-law this angry was a first for me too. Now that everyone involved is here, I'd like to resume our discussion. Please have a seat over here, I said, pointing to the chairs I'd set up at the end of the table. My in-laws and the other guests took their seats as instructed. Once everyone was seated, I resumed the conversation with a smile. Now, Lisa, please introduce yourself. I'm Lisa, 22 years old. I'm so sorry. James invited me, and I couldn't refuse. That act is quite enough. Huh. Lisa pretended to cry and kept apologizing, but I cut her off. Caught off guard by my unexpected attitude, she looked shocked. She probably wanted to play the innocent role of a young new hire who couldn't say no to her boss. Unfortunately for her, I knew all about her plans. You told me everything, didn't you? On Instagram, right? Miss Sweet Pea. No way. Lisa turned pale and stared at me as if she had seen a ghost. Her parents looked at her in confusion. I then spread out the printed conversation between Lisa and me on the table for everyone to see. The conversation detailed a shameful account of their affair. Lisa's parents seemed to shift between anger and embarrassment. After a while, her mother stood up and slapped her. Ouch! What was that for? Lisa protested. You told me you were confused because you didn't know he was married and got a legal document about it. What is this? You knew he was married, encouraged him to divorce his wife, and then there's all this trash talk. Lisa's mother seemed very sensitive about the subject and began to tear up. I did feel a bit sorry for her, but it was a mess her daughter had gotten into. Plus, it'd be good for her to know what I'd be talking about next. Also, seeing your husband every day and then hitting on another married man from the same department. That's some stamina. Wait, Fats? James's face was filled with disbelief as he listened to my words. When Lisa seemed very flustered, it seemed he realized it was true. Fuming, James stood up, grabbed Lisa by both shoulders, and yelled, You had another man besides me. Who is it? Do you know how much money I spent on you? And you cheat on me, you wretched woman. Hey, you were the one who made the first move on me, even though you have a wife and kids. It's a privilege for you to date a young and cute girl like me. What? How can you be so deluded? Watching the two of them bicker, I sighed. Blaming each other while ignoring their own faults, there's only so much foolishness one can tolerate. It seemed I wasn't the only one who felt this way, Both sets of parents looked utterly dumbfounded. Then Lisa's father, who had been silent until now, stood up. The arguing between James and Lisa stopped immediately. Lisa's father began speaking slowly. "Michelle, I deeply apologize for everything. We want to cover the damages for emotional distress. We know a dairy farmer looking for help, and we'll send Lisa there to work off the debt. She won't leave until she pays us back in full, and we won't provide any assistance. I don't think this makes up for everything, but does this solution work for you?" I nodded. "I'd rather not have her name appearing in my bank account every month, so I appreciate your offer. Whether you cut ties with her is up to you." Lisa's father left with Lisa and her mother. As soon as they were gone, I felt a sense of resolution. But then James said something surprising. "Hey, Lisa had me fooled. So, can we start over? I'll do whatever you say." "No, that's fine. I can't stand being with you anymore. Let's get a divorce and I'll be seeking child support and division of assets." "What? No way." James slumped back into his chair, looking dejected. My father-in-law forcefully dragged James out of the house and took him back to their family home. Finally, it was over. Alone in the living room, I took a deep breath, relaxed, and then started preparing dinner for my children, who would be home soon. Later, James and I divorced without any issues. James's parents were furious, and even his mother said she never wanted to see his face again. James was cut off from his in-laws and didn't receive any financial support. He asked if he could pay me in installments, but I refused. As a result, James had to take on debt to pay the alimony. His affair with Lisa was exposed, and while he managed to keep his job, he was moved to a lesser role with a 40% salary cut. With his reduced income and debt to repay, he had to work part-time at construction sites at night and on weekends. As for Lisa, she's working non-stop at a relative's ranch. She used to love cosmetics, but now she's in a place where the only nearby salon is run by elderly women in their 70s. She can't afford makeup or get her nails done. Every day, she laments that things didn't turn out as she expected. She's also being sued for alimony by the wife of another man she had an affair with. It seems her liberation isn't coming anytime soon. As for me, I'm living happily with my 2 kids. My piano lessons have become more popular, and since I started offering evening classes 3 times a week, they've been fully booked by adults wanting to learn piano. My income has steadily increased. I thought my kids would be sad after the divorce, but it turns out I was the only one who felt that way. They even told me, "We like you even more after the divorce, Mom. You're cooler now." That made me a bit happy. Education will cost a lot, but if things continue this way, I'll be able to save enough for my children's future paths. Listening to the beautiful melodies my students play on the piano, my heart dances with excitement for the bright future ahead.